The last things we have are the spinal cord tracts and then the nerves. Spinal cord tracts are going to obviously be what gets this information from the periphery, from an effector, up to the brain to be interpreted, or taking it from the brain down to the effector. Okay. But first, just a brief, spinal cord. Remember, spinal cord, there it is. We have the butterfly in the middle here. Obviously not drawn to scale. Okay. So there's my spinal cord. I have the gray matter. And I have white matter. There's my gray matter. And there's my surrounding white matter. Much more better picture there than me trying to draw it, right? When we look at it, we have gray matter is arranged in what's called horns. Okay. We have a dorsal horn, a ventral horn, lateral horn in parts. When it comes to white matter, they're arranged in columns. So let's look at these various different spinal cord tracts. White matter. This is where we have our ascending and descending fiber tracts. Again, we have 6 columns. We have ascending tracts and we have descending tracts. And in these columns, again, the columns are sometimes referred to as funiculi. But we have tracts that go up the spinal cord and we have tracts that come down the spinal cord. Those that come up the spinal cord carry sensory impulses. Makes sense? Those that go down carry motor impulses. Okay? So descending, motor, ascending, sensory, always synonymous with one another, right? When, again, kind of the names for these things tell you where information is coming from and where it's going to. For the sympathetic, for the ascending. For the descending, it starts where it began and it tells you where it's ending. Okay, so cortical spinal tells you it started in the anterior region of the cortex, of the cerebral cortex, and synapsing down in the spinal cord. Okay, spinothalamic tells you it's from the lateral aspect of the spine going up to the thalamus. So the name kind of gives you the beginning and end of how these tracks run. So if you can kind of figure that out, then you can kind of easily figure out where these things are traveling from, because we're going to look at it very straightforward and basic here. So let's look at ascending tracks first. There are kind of 3 major ascending tracks. Some of them may cross over, some of them don't. For the most part, they do cross over. The fancy word for that is called decussation. Decussation is crossing over. When they decussate, they cross, all right? They can cross over in the spinal cord at the level and then travel up. So it can travel from the left side over to the right side of the spinal cord and go on up to the right side of the brain. Or it can go travel up the left side of the spinal cord, get into the medulla there, cross over in the medulla and go to the right side. Because remember, sensory information, the left side of the brain usually controls the right side of the body and vice versa, all right? So again, a lot of this stuff is going to be contralateral. There's only a few things that stay on the same side. So here are our 3 major ascending tracts. The dorsal column, which this is also referred to as the medial lemniscal pathway. And I believe, okay, good. They don't even have it on here. They don't even have it on here. Good, they don't have it on here. Oh, there it is right there. Medial lemniscal tract right there, okay? The medial lemniscal tract is the fasciculus gracilis, the fasciculus cuneus, okay? So the dorsal column is the first one. I call it dorsal column. You can call it the medial lemniscal tract or the medium lemniscal pathway. If that so is your desire, you can, okay? On the exam, I'll probably use dorsal column, to be honest. For the dorsal column, this is bringing us information about proprioceptive input. All right, we'll talk about proprioceptive input and touch and whatnot. These are all general sensations here. Proprioceptive, touch, pressure, vibration. These are some general types of sensation. You could maybe debate proprioceptive input is special. It's not special, it's unique. Okay. But again, it's just kind of all general in the grand scheme. Fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneus. If you remember that the gracilis muscle is in the leg, then fasciculus gracilis is the one that goes further down. Fasciculus gracilis brings us information about proprioceptive touch, pressure, vibration from below T6. For fasciculus cuneus, it brings information into the brain about all that above T6. The second major pathway that we have is the anterolateral. Again, this one crosses over just like the dorsal column does, as you can see there. There's two parts, anterior and lateral. I'm not getting into specifics of where specific crude touch, pressure, body position, pain, temperature, all that comes in with these two. Just know that it is the spinothalamic tract, and there's an anterior and a lateral. Okay, fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneus. All right, spinothalamic. Again, what they bring in. This makes great multiple choice questions, matching questions on an exam. Excuse me. I'm just highlighting a couple things that they do. Again, if I was to ask this, those would probably be the distractors that I would put. The third major ascending tract that we have is referred to as the spinocerebellar pathway. And again, as you can kind of see, spino, these start within the spine and go up to the thalamus or go up to the cerebellum. So remember, this the cerebellum is involved with smooth coordinated movement. Okay, so it's going to be involved with putting in proprioceptive input, putting in smooth coordinated movements so you can smoothly interact with your surroundings. Pretty easy. As you can kind of see, these spinocerebellar, whether it's anterior or posterior, you can see it is specific. Some spinocerebellars, the anterior spinocerebellar, some is crossed, some is not. You can see the posterior spinocerebellar, some of them are uncrossed. I won't ask specifically, is the anterior spinocerebellar a crosser or not? Just know that spinocerebellar, whether it's anterior or posterior, some may cross, some may not. Okay. So these are my three ascending tracts. The dorsal column pathway with fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneus, proprioceptive input, vibration. The anterior lateral pathway, which is the spinothalamic tract. Again, crude touch, pain, and temperature. And the last one is the spinocerebellar pathway, coordinated muscular movement. It goes to the cerebellum. That's what it does. Some of them are crossed. Some of them are uncrossed. They do not cussate. When it comes to the descending tracts, again, the descending tracts are always associated with motor, right? So these are carrying the motor commands. So as you can see here, these are going to innervate skeletal muscles, right? This is not the smooth stuff or the cardiac muscle stuff, right? These are skeletal muscles. Cortical spinal are sometimes referred to as pyramidal just because they run through the pyramids of the medulla oblongata, okay? So if you see cortical spinal, pyramidal, it's the same thing. Okay. Cortical spinal tracts, they will travel from the cerebral cortex, as the name implies, from the cortex, and travel down the spinal cord. Okay. These are originated in that precentral gyrus. That's where my primary motor cortex was, or is. And you can kind of see the vast majority of these things from a lateral aspect cross over. Anterior, they do not cross. They do not cross. Sorry about that. Something happened. There we go. All right. the lateral corticospinal tracts ways. Anterior corticospinal. Okay. Lateral goes to lateral. What's lateral? My arms, my legs. Okay. So the lateral corticospinal tract actually goes and supplies the muscles for the arms and the legs. The axial muscles is the anterior corticospinal. A of anterior, A of axial. So your axial muscles are supplied by the anterior corticospinal tract. There's another one as well, because as you look at this, it seems like we've left a lot of skeletal muscles out. Corticobulbar tract is not found in the spinal cord. Okay, it actually runs out from the medulla there and supplies the skeletal muscles on the head and neck. All right, so this is head and neck, but it's not in the spinal cord. Head and neck, and you don't need to worry about if it crosses over or not. All right. Extrapyramidal, these don't go through the pyramids, all right? When it comes to extrapyramidal, these are coming from someplace outside of the pyramids. Substantia nigra, stuff like that. All right. Oh, I have it right there. Substantia nigra, the thalamus, okay? Corpus striatum, some other basal nuclei, right? This is the extrapyramidal tracts. When it comes to corticospinal or pyramidal tracts, there are just anterior and lateral, and that's it. Okay. When it comes to my extrapyramidal tracts, these are going to do a lot of fine movements, okay? Helping to initiate a fine coordinated muscular movement, helping us to maintain posture, okay? As you can see, they're controlled facial expressions. But when it comes to pyramidal, there's just the corticospinal, anterior and lateral. When it comes to extrapyramidal, there are 4 different ones. For some reason, tectospinal is not associated with this in this book. Tectospinal arises from the tectum, the superior colliculus. So it's involved with reflexive movements of the eyes and body position. So again, the superior colliculus is what brings us in there, and that's all right here, tectospinal. Tectospinal. From the tectum to the spinal cord, it's the superior colliculus. Sup colliculus. C-O-L-L-I. Colliculus. Okay. And it's involved with reflexive eye and head movements. Okay. So there's a tectospinal in here. But reticulospinal comes from the reticular apparatus, basically. It's the most major one. And it originates in the reticular formation and runs down through the spinal cord. It's crossed, okay? That's maybe I'll ask it, maybe I'm not. It's involved with, posture and balance. Again, if I have stimulation going into the reticular activating system here, the reticular formation, then I'm going to stay awake. If I don't have any input going into the reticular formation there from stimuli, then we shut down and we fall asleep. What happens to your posture and balance when you're sitting there in class and all of a sudden you start falling asleep and your head starts moving? You lose your posture. Vestibulospinal. This arises from the vestibular nuclei. It's going to be something that we see when we talk about balance and equilibrium. The vestibular nuclei gets information from the vestibular apparatus, among some other things that we'll see. Okay. But it helps us to maintain that balance when moving around. Okay, sitting, standing, walking. All right. We're going to see that there's a lot of information going into this vestibular nuclei that helps us to interpret if I'm standing still, if I'm sitting, am I walking around? Okay. So that does that by the movement that happens from the specific sensory receptors within the vestibule. And we'll talk about that when we look at special senses. The last one is the rubrospinal, and rubro means red. So this arises in the red nucleus, found in that midbrain there. It helps to control fine, precise, coordinated muscular movements. Okay. Substantia nigra works with this one as well. Okay. Substantia nigra works with this one as well. So rubrospinal is the tract that helps to involve precise movement. Okay. So is it pyramidal or extrapyramidal? Is it descending or ascending? And what does it carry? That's more than likely what I'm going to ask on the exam. Okay. There will not be a short answer question based upon these guys or gals.